The poster boy of Mortal Kombat. I don't know who your favorite character is, who your current main is, and I don't care. At one point or another, all of us tinkered around with Hanzo Hasashi, aka Scorpion. We tried him out, we annoyed people with his teleports, we did the spear move so we could hear him say the thing.
Get over here!
And we at least hovered over him cause he's so damn flashy. I mean, he's a fire ninja dressed in yellow. Enough said. And that's one of the things about Ed Boon's eternal favorite that sticks out to me the most, namely that he's actually a terrible ninja. Think about it, he dresses up in the brightest colors, his powers are loud and great for torture, not assassination, and he yells like a damn drill sergeant from hell every time he attempts a sneak attack!
Saga, sneak attacks don't work if you yell it out loud.
That's not to say that he or the developers are doing something wrong. It's deliberate. I always imagined that Scorpion wore yellow as a sort of flex. Because he was such a strong and gifted warrior, he would deliberately wear the most noticeable color and still infiltrate palaces and strongholds undetected to kill his targets. And when he didn't, particularly on large-scale missions involving more members of his clan, it would be a way for him to draw attention away from the younger, less experienced Shirai Ryu, who were perhaps not as well equipped to deal with such high-stakes scenarios. He was a protector. In a way, he was the anti-ninja. Some sources say that all the Shirai Ryu ninja wore yellow uniforms, but frankly that's kinda dumb. Unless you live in Naruto land, your garb should be as nondescript as possible. Either way, this audacious behavior goes well with the history of the Shirai Ryu. The lore that John Tobias wrote for them states that Scorpion's clan is actually an offshoot of the Lin Kuei. Its founder, Takeda, not to be confused with MKX Takeda, was a member of the Lin Kuei, and at some point during the mid-late 1500s, he defected from it, taking with him some of the clan's most well-guarded secrets, and returned to his home country of Japan to found the Shirai Ryu. Presumably, the various techniques he taught to his clan's initiates gradually developed into the art of ninjutsu, and he offered the service of the Shirai Ryu to many lords and generals. As the clan's reputation spread far and wide, it drew the ire of the Lin Kuei, who were not happy about their secrets leaking out or the fact that they had a new competitor to contend with. So the Shirai Ryu had a history of being a bold, daring organization, as proud as they were stubborn. And Hanzo Hasashi, aka Scorpion, is a worthy exemplar of his clan. In terms of abilities, the fire theme is pretty obvious and self-explanatory. One of the things I always liked about Mortal Kombat, though, is that its characters don't rely solely on their elemental shtick. That's just one piece of their identities, and that makes them more complex instead of just getting relegated to fire guy, ice guy, and guy who spits his breakfast guy. Although recently they're kind of turning them into one-note elemental people more and more. Rain went from having one water-based move in MK3, it wasn't even clear that it was water back then, it was just called Mind Control Orb, to having water coated into his fucking pokes. Presumably he also stirs his coffee with a water spoon somehow. And I can understand why this would seem like an improvement, like you're enhancing the identity of these characters, but it actually just makes them less nuanced and more hollow. The more component parts a character is made of, the more interesting and multi-layered they are, whereas the bigger you make one particular part, the more you do it at the expense of every other component. Put it this way, what makes a good burger is not the bread or the meat or the greens or the onion or the fries or the sauce, it's all of those things in combination, whereas if you make one ingredient so big that there's no room for anything else, even if that ingredient is the meat, it just becomes the world's driest two-ingredient sandwich. Thus, what makes Scorpion so interesting is that he's a ninja, he teleports, he's got an unconventional weapon, he has a tragic past, he's undead, and he also breathes fire. Talk about an OP combo. Another interesting thing to discuss is the source of Scorpion's powers. This is a point of contention because Scorpion seems to be the only character, even among other undead ninjas like Noob Saibot, who seems to derive his powers exclusively from the Netherrealm. Before death, Scorpion was just a guy. No fancy powers, just a guy with a spear who maxed out his Batman stat. Not well enough, though. This teaches us two things. One, he and his clan were that much more badass for gaining such a strong reputation and becoming powerful enough to rival the Lin Kuei, who have fucking metahumans under their belt. And two, Scorpion's fire is presumably much hotter and more dangerous than regular fire. At least that's what he tells himself at night. The thing about the Netherrealm is that it's not just fire and brimstone. There are plenty of facets to it, and plenty of its denizens like Draman, Warlock, Noob Saibot, or Quan Chi aren't associated with fire. So between that, the yellow garb, and the character's personalities partly informing their powers, I think it's safe to assume that Scorpion was going to develop some kind of fire skills even without his rebirth through the Netherrealm, which is a theory I mentioned in my Sub-Zero video that I wasn't too fond of, but it's grown on me over time. Speaking of Quan Chi, Scorpion's tale is tied to him as well, Quan being the sorcerer responsible for initially pitting him against Sub-Zero and for destroying the Shirai Ryu. He later gained more and more significance after each game retroactively, much to the dismay of many people, including lore experts like the Fourth Snake.
Originally, Quan Chi was inserted into the rivalry and mythologies only to explain why both characters were in the same place at the same time for their fight to the death. Then DCU claimed Quan Chi is the one who revived Scorpion as a Spectre, which carried over to 2011, which also established him as the one who brought back fucking everyone, including Bi-Han, and it's presented in such a way as to imply that Scorpion's revival was just a means to get Bi-Han as a minion, leaving Hanzo twiddling his thumbs in the Netherrealm until Bi-Han dies again.
The trouble with implicating a character into the life of another to this degree and giving them more and more agency over them is that it reduces the relevancy of that second character, and that's what the Fourth Snake is criticizing here. But that can work if you imply certain things in your storytelling. Instead of being powerful enough to raise such powerful wraiths and specters like Scorpion and Noob Saibot from the dead and make them completely subservient to him, which, let's face it, is a plot hole in its own right, because if it were that easy, Quan Chi should have raised a bazillion of them and become Emperor of the Universe by now. But no, instead perhaps he just happened to be there when the fallen warriors rose from their graves, and then conned them into his service by boldly and proudly proclaiming himself as the only reason why they're still alive, or not completely dead rather. Which is exactly what a swindler like Quan Chi would do, and it goes well with his power set too, as he's often depicted using illusion and trickery in combat. A little smoke and mirrors, a little torture while they're still weak, some false promises, and voila, 2 powerful undead soldiers under your command. Quan Chi is that mean kid that no one will share their Scorpion and Sub-Zero action figures with, so he steals them. But enough about him, back to the action figures. Like I mentioned in the sub video, Scorpion and Sub-Zero are not so much elemental ninjas as they are temperature ones. Sub-Zero's ice powers aren't an expression of water, they're an expression of the coldest form of water. Similarly, Scorpion wields the hottest, most damaging form of fire there is. It's an expression of how much of a dangerous loose cannon he can be, but no, not this one, the original Scorpion. M1K Scorpion is loose cannon, single N. So the fire is an expression of how dangerous Scorps is, but also symbolizes his passion, his absolute fervor with which he devotes himself to everything he does and everyone he pledges himself to. And these are the 2 sides of the Scorpion coin. The positive side, when he's allowed to serve the people and things he needs, and the negative side that rears up when you take all of those things away from him. And this is a good parallel to masculinity in general, and how relative it can be. If you give a man a purpose, something to strive for, he will input all of his masculine energy into it, and thus that energy becomes constructive, and the man integrates himself into society that way. But if you leave him aimless, or deliberately take that purpose away from him, he will become destructive. Put another way, if no constructive purpose is given, the purpose becomes destruction. This is where Kuai Liang comes in, and this Naruto Sasuke level bromance is formed.
Because you're my
The ice to temper the fire. It's funny because the name Sub-Zero invokes both dread and comfort in Scorpion, hatred and kindness, and a great deal of guilt, because it's the name of the warrior that took his life, but also the moniker of a man who lost his brother to Scorpion, one who, like him, knows what it's like to lose family. So it evokes a very complicated set of conflicting emotions that constantly tug away at his dual nature, the warmth and the rampant wildfire within him. This is the kind of conflict that Scorpion has to contend with forever, and it's part of why he should stay a neutral character. Lawful neutral perhaps, but still neutral. More on that later. Scorpion draws good parallels and distinctions to both Sub-Zeros. In the case of the Elder Sub-Zero, both Bi-Han and Hanzo suffered the same fate and became undead warriors, not fully dying but never really whole again either. However, one lost themselves while the other lost everyone else. Throughout MK mythologies, Bi-Han's morality is called into question, impressing upon the player the idea that what's really at stake in this game isn't the map of the elements or Shinnok's amulet or some clan rivalry, it's Sub-Zero's soul. He could either redeem it or lose it entirely, and the game makes it clear that both outcomes are possible. The tragedy of Bi-Han, then, is the fact that in the end he became Noob Saibot, an accursed wraith and a shadow pun not intended, of his former self. This contrasts him nicely against Scorpion, who in the end managed to preserve his sense of self and his independence, but lost everyone and everything that was dear to him. Different kind of pain. And these stories hit hard because they're more true than we'd care to think. As you age, all those you know will inevitably die around you, and as you age further, you'll start to gradually lose all that makes you you. Your looks, your abilities, your mind, your memory. It's very likely that that which you are will die before your body actually does. How nice. As for the second Sub-Zero, Kuai Liang empathizes with Scorpion on the dead family front, like I said, but more importantly, he makes him realize that vengeance only breeds more vengeance, prompting Scorps to put an end to the cycle of suffering. There's this beautiful contrast between the menacing specter that you see and the wholesome life that he used to have. Well, wholesome for a shinobi anyway, because if you look at most assassins, they don't have that many close ties and can even be partly brainwashed. Yet Scorpion had a wife and child. He was a part of a strong, proud clan. He had strong comrades to back him up. This is when this type of character operates at their best. In spite of his dangerous, even morally questionable occupation, he is fully integrated in society. He has a family, he has a clan, he protects those under his care. He has all of these support systems that enrich him and allow him to operate at his best. And in one fell swoop, it was all taken away from him. The tragedy of Scorpion is not just the death of his family and clan, but the fact that he's never allowed to be at his best. Only his worst. Apart from flashbacks and Elseworlds tales, we see what is ostensibly a broken man trying to salvage what's left of his humanity. The true test of a man is to challenge him not at his best, but at his worst. However, the worst nightmare of a man is to be stuck at your worst for all eternity. Loss is one of the unifying themes of Mortal Kombat. Sub-Zero lost a brother, Reptile lost his people, and Scorpion lost his family, clan, honor, and his very life. A flesh wound, really. And it's not just these three, this applies to most of the other characters. Sonya lost a partner, Sindel lost a husband, Jax lost his arms, Cabal lost his health and appearance, Noob lost his humanity, Onaga lost his life and his vaunted throne, Shinnok lost his Elder God status and his sanity, as he was tortured for eons in the Netherrealm, and the whole of Earthrealm lost its champion. And part of what makes Mortal Kombat interesting is seeing how these different characters react to the loss. This also reinforces why characters like Shao Kahn and Quan Chi are the ultimate antagonist of the series, because they're true psychopaths who not only cause but also thrive on other people's loss. And they themselves are virtually immune to it because the only thing they really have to lose is their lives. They don't really care about anything else. There you go, I just turned Mortal Kombat into an allegory on psychopathy. One more point I'd like to expand on. Scorpion has something that Mortal Kombat has gradually lost over its multi-year journey, and that something is moral ambiguity. Neutrality. He's even described as a wildcard in his MK3 bio. What makes a playground fun is you have the obvious heroes on one side and the obvious villains on the other, and there are all these other characters of various moralities in between. And those neutral characters are important because they can tug and play with the balance of power in ways that keep the central conflict between good and evil from becoming stale, expected, and variationless. Scorpion is a prime example of this. He looks evil, but he's really not. He sometimes helps the good guys and seems like a good guy, but he's really not. His backstory, motivations, and allegiance are all deeply personal, and so is his morality. He is self-driven, and that's interesting because it makes his temporary allegiances hard to predict and truly turns him into a wild card. This is what made his journey from MK1, the actual one, all the way to MK Deception rewarding to follow, because he started out as a very dangerous, unhinged character that you feared would screw the story up, but that over time slowly became a little more heroic and amenable to common sense. And when that finally happens after a long period of keeping you constantly on your toes, not knowing what'll happen, the resolution hits with a level of satisfaction and catharsis that the more conventional characters and their arcs cannot match. It's very much akin to Zuko's protracted character arc, because the end point of his journey is so impactful for exactly the same reasons. You genuinely don't know for the longest time which side the pendulum will swing with either of these two. And this type of character character has sadly slowly been phased out of Mortal Kombat stories over time. When you think about it, it's actually hilarious that Deception introduced Chaos Realm and Order Realm and Havoc and all of these various parts that don't fit the standard good or evil tribes, only to shoehorn every single one of them into generic good and bad armies in the very next game. You can always trust a good guy to be good and a bad guy to be bad, but Scorpion is neither, and that's part of what makes him interesting to watch, because you never know what he'll get up to next. A word on his offshoots. Smoke is a character that initially confused me and probably others as well. His human version, that is. He has the same look, the same moveset, the same spear, the teleport, the catchphrase, the whole 9 yards. The only unique thing about him was the smoke effect they added to his model, which does nothing. Obviously, this was done to save time and other resources, and was how we got from 2 ninja to a whole fucking army of them. Palette swaps, copy-pasted moves, it was a necessary evil at first. But even one of the original palette swaps had moves from multiple counterparts instead of copying just one of them to a T. And Smoke's design has become a running gag over the years, cause even now they just can't decide what they want this character to be. First he's human, then he's a Japanese smoke demon, then no, actually let's make him human again. Keep his spear, no, let's cut that out, okay, put that back in, nah, take it away. Long hair, short hair, he's a walking identity crisis. That pretty much carries over to the story department too, where they really didn't know what to do with him, as he constantly oscillates between being an enslaved cyborg, an enslaved human-machine hybrid, or an enslaved revenant. A lot of variety there, all while retaining his very tangential BFF status with Sub-Zero that's never developed. And it's a shame because he's so goddamn cool, and he deserves a little more. First, let's address him plagiarizing Scorpion's moveset. I think that in an age where the Shirai Ryu have grown to be fierce competitors and rivals of the Lin Kuei, it makes sense that one would start to copy the other in an effort to stay on top. We see this kind of thing happen in every industry all the time. Competitors constantly steal ideas from one another in a bid to stay relevant. If one soda company releases a lime coke, we need to make our own. And that's what happened with Scorpion and Smoke. Scorpion built a strong reputation for himself as one of the Shirai Ryu's most effective ninjas, so the Lin Kuei looked at that and said, we need one of our own. Hence Smoke. That's how I'd explain it anyway. As for his role in the story, I think the original plotline of tasking him to hunt down Sub-Zero after his defection from the Lin Kuei is a solid one. Just for the love of gods, don't turn him into this gray puppy dog who ends up being Kuai Liang's yes man and lacks any agency of his own. This character needs to retain a little bit of bite, somewhere between Hanzo's fuck-off nature and Kuai Liang's more lawful self. He needs to be menacing and mysterious, even if in the end he gets swayed by no Jutsu. And now that I think about it, from a certain point of view, his identity crisis is his story. Raised and brainwashed by the Lin Kuei, trained to become a Scorpion clone, turned into an emotionless robot, forced to prove his loyalty by hunting down the closest thing to a friend he's ever had, used and discarded by the Lin Kuei, used and discarded by Noob Saibot, absorbed into Triborg if you want to make that thing canon. Smoke was never allowed to be his own person, so the search for his identity should be a big part of his arc. And his turn to the good side needs to be monumental. He could have, for instance, turned against Noob during Deception, saving Kuai Liang's life in the process, or he could have chosen to defend Kuai last minute against Scorpion in MK4 when the latter thought Subs killed his family. And all of this after Smoke hunting Sub-Zero in his own right, only to switch sides and instead save him after a carefully prepared build-up. Something that's dramatic and cathartic. A full rewrite will have to wait because this video is running long enough as it is. Leave a like if you'd like to see that. As for his powers and abilities, Smoke's ability to turn himself into, you guessed it, smoke particles is rather unique, and low-key makes him into probably one of the most powerful characters around, cause technically he could just force himself down your throat. because technically he could just force himself into your lungs and kill you instantly. But of course he doesn't do that because that would be OP as shit. Smoke, the gas, not the ninja, is a bunch of particles and gases that get produced when a material gets ignited and air gets entrapped and mixed with the gas. It's called incomplete combustion as opposed to complete combustion, which should only leave behind carbon dioxide, water vapor, and no smoke. In other words, smoke literally is fire plus air. And that goes well with what I was saying previously previously about his personality. He's menacing, dangerous, and driven, but not quite as ardent or zealous as some of the fire characters, and he's also honorable, stoic, and values freedom like an airbender. One tempers the other. At any rate, Smoke can launch smoke balls at his opponent that seem to displace them, he can displace himself, he can turn into vapor to avoid incoming projectiles and maneuver himself on the battlefield. Coupled with his spear, at least the versions of him that have it, it all makes him a pretty efficient assassin. As to what exactly happens when he uses his power, well, that one kind of fries your brain, doesn't it? Or maybe it's my own. I can understand why they turned him into a smoke monster in MK9, because turning your entire body into smoke is a pretty radical power to have. But it does appear to be one of the possibilities of this element. With a high enough degree of mastery over smoke, this is going to get confusing really fast, one could turn their molecules into smoke and rearrange themselves elsewhere, kind of like how Raiden turns his molecules into pure lightning when he ports. The gas is clearly deadly, as shown by some of Smoke's fatalities, so it could be hydrogen sulfide, which is a type of smoke that's poisonous, corrosive, and flammable. Or they could literally be tiny fractions of Smoke himself that are so minuscule that they just have the appearance of smoke. Oh, and before I forget, he can also turn invisible. Presumably this is a different mechanism than reptiles, perhaps by partially turning himself into smoke and making that smoke colorless or transparent. I see Smoke as a cold-blooded version of Scorpion, more precise, calculating, and emotionally subdued. He's almost like a vision of what Scorpion would have looked like were he a Lin Kuei. You know, from the old timeline. If you've only ever played MK1, this was confusing as hell. Finally, let's talk Takeda. Yes, I know it's Takeda, but
We're in America!
and Takeda does sound a bit cooler. Don't crucify me, Fourth Snake. Or do. Sounds fun. Anyway, Takeda actually has a pretty solid fan club despite not doing much of anything in his debut title. And while I'm not really sold on the new generation angle, particularly not this idea of perpetually re-establishing the new Shirai Ryu and the new Lin Kuei, which end up just being hollow names that have no connection to what those organizations actually were, I've come to respect what Takeda symbolizes. He's basically another saving throw for Scorpion, a second roll of the dice, a second shot at life, which is weird because Scorpion himself gets revived as a human in that same game, so he himself has a second chance, kinda making this whole theme pointless. But anyway, Takeda's supposed to be a vision of how Scorpion could have turned out had he not had his premature end. To that effect, Takeda has no powers, much like Scorpion didn't back when he was alive. Yeah, he has some telepathic ability, but he hasn't been shown to use it to a significant enough degree to be called cheating, so he's pretty Batman. Fairly Batman. He has gadgets and weapons that mimic his mentor's fighting style, including a short-range teleporter and a couple of multi-purpose whips. And he also gets a pair of cool plasma swords, or pulse blades as they're referred to in Armageddon, which, I gotta say, even though lightsabers are always a yes, they're ridiculously excessive. Clearly he didn't have enough going for him with the whips and the armor and the Scorpion motifs, but at least it is keeping with Scorpion's fire theme and also yielded one of MKX's best variations. Ronin Takeda's neutral, his spacing, his ability to use one of his swords as a trap and a fake-out tool, it all made for one of the most technical variations of the game that powerhouses like Hayate caused terrible damage with. So that's nice. And it should be noted that his telepathic abilities could eventually become powerful enough to get him from so-so tier to broken tier, since if you know what your opponent is thinking at all times, you can develop Jedi-like reflexes and predict and counter every move that they make before they make it. So you definitely have all the necessary ingredients for a great burger, not just in the abilities department, but in the story one as well. Connecting him to both Scorpion and Kenshi, and possibly to Ermac later on through his telepathy, was actually a pretty smart move, as it allows them to play off of these more established characters and craft some meaningful storylines with them. Now obviously NetherRealm didn't do that, but imagine how cool it would be if Kenshi's possessed variation wasn't a variation, but a storyline whereby Kenshi's ancestral sword breaks during a brutal battle, perhaps with the game's big baddie, causing the spirits of his ancestors contained within the blade to burst out and possess Kenshi. Because he's only human, and not a walking soul repository who was designed to contain many souls like Ermac, Kenshi is completely overwhelmed and turned into a rabid vessel of dangerous spirits, a state which threatens to tear his body and soul apart if he doesn't get those things out of him. Takeda, of course, tries to help him, but his telepathy isn't strong enough to pacify the spirits, and he almost gets killed fighting possessed Quan Chi. He then seeks out Ermac, the only being who could possibly help, but that goes badly too, as Takeda tries once again to link telepathically with the myriad souls that is Ermac and convince them all to help, and nearly gets overwhelmed. But it later turns out that this process actually improved Ermac's control over his many component parts. Takeda's sincerity and ability to help many of the individual souls find serenity reduced the overall turmoil, the constant battle for control, and kept Ermac's form from deteriorating. Near the climax of the game, Takeda decides to face his father again and sacrifice himself if that's what it takes to save him. Scorpion appears, fearing Takeda will end up just like him, and then as Quan Chi is about to murder his own child, Ermac swoops in and saves the day. He rescues Takeda and absorbs the souls possessing Quan Chi into himself like it's nothing. And all of this can be weaved around the main story of the game effortlessly. Last idea I'll mention, and longtime viewers will think I've lost my mind, but I mean, put it this way. You make a character that's an assassin, stealthy, mysterious, can read your fucking mind, and is armed with not one but two metallic whips with spikes on them, and can bind and scratch and choke you and make you fall at their feet. Need I go on? As much as I'm generally against gender swapping, I think not making Takeda a girl was a missed opportunity, not just because of the BDSM undertones, but yeah, actually just because of that. That's a plenty good reason, don't pretend otherwise. And there's also a concept art floating around of a female version of Takeda that might be official, which means I'm not the only man of culture in the house. Fire and smoke, blood and honor, vengeance and redemption. These characters tap into timeless stories that resonate with us on a fundamental level, and it's what makes Scorpion and characters like him truly undying.